Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. And welcome to Food Processing Skills Canada's webinar presenting our report on virtual and augmented reality in the food and beverage processing sector. We're really excited to spend the next hour with you exploring the contents of our report and also how we believe virtual reality has the ability to be a game changer for the food and beverage processing industry. My name is Mark McGowan. I'm the project manager for iFood 360, which is FPSC's exciting new project that's going to deliver virtual and immersive training and career exploration experiences to workers and job seekers across the country in the coming months. We'll tell you a little bit more about that later in the presentation, but first I'd like to introduce Mike Sawicki. Mike is a project specialist for iFood 360, and Mike is also going to be the moderator for our webinar today. Do you want to say hi, Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Appreciate the introduction. My name is Mike Sawicki, and I'll be the project specialist for the iFood 360 project, as well as I'll be helping with any technical difficulties today in the Zoom. So thanks for introducing me, Mark.
Thanks, Mike. You may notice that your microphones and cameras are turned off, but that definitely doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you today. We've planned for a few poll questions throughout the presentation, and we're really looking forward to getting your feedback on those. And we've also planned for a couple opportunities to answer your questions. So if, as we go along, you have some questions, please feel free to type them in the chat or send them directly to Mike, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. Finally, I want to let you know that we're going to be recording today's presentation, and we're going to be sending you a link to it afterwards, just in case you have any technical difficulties or if you have to step away, or even if you just want to watch the webinar again. So keep an eye out for that email with the link to a video of the presentation. Next, it's my honor to introduce the author of our report, Harrison Olajos, who is the co-founder and CEO of Up 360. Harrison, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. So yes, as Mark mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Up 360. We're a Canadian-based firm that helps organizations, institutions, associations with their strategy and how it relates to immersive technology in education and training.
Great. Thanks, Harrison. It's also my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Griffith, who is the Executive Director of Food Processing Skills Canada, who's going to say a word of welcome and also tell you a little bit about our report and our project. Jennifer?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to the team. We have a bang-up team here at Food Processing Skills Canada is helping us with this wonderful project that we call iFood 360, where we're learning about VR and immersive learning and hoping to share that with folks in the food manufacturing sector across Canada, and educators and employment centers and community groups. So I'd like to thank our funders of this project, who is Future Skills Center. They're dedicated to helping Canadians gain the skills that they need to thrive in this labor market. They are helping numerous sectors, and we are really grateful to be partnering with them on a couple of projects for the food manufacturing industry. So we're really pleased about that, and that we're actually going to be able to offer some really, cool tools, I think, and products to our sector when it comes to training and development. So thank you to the Future Skills Center. Big shout out to Pedro and the team out there. So a bit about the project. It is a 2-year program that we started pretty much last March, beginning of April. And what we are doing is we're looking to focus on 3 areas in terms of developing virtual reality learning experience. So what you're going to hear today is based off a study just globally and generally about augmented reality or different types of virtual learning. We're focusing on virtual reality, but there are obviously various different types of those where you'll see Harrison walk you through that from the report that you would see. But this project, that was one part of the project, and the guts of it is actually we're focusing on developing some training around food and worker safety. So we'll probably get into some GMP sanitation training and so forth. So the idea is that they're going to take some online learning and then we're going to have some practical applications in virtual reality. So we are actually providing the headsets, the Oculus sets to companies across Canada, as well as educators and employment centers, community centers, and so forth, to actually get folks using it and training in those areas. So the 3 areas are, like I was saying, around food manufacturing skills. Then we're going to go into social emotional skills around empathy, adaptability, really going to try and get into some immersive learning where, you know, we can switch roles and maybe the supervisor can be the frontline worker, the frontline worker can be the supervisor, and then maybe even be a different race or nationality and so forth, to really understand what it is to be in someone else's shoes. And then we are going on to career exploration. So that's where we want to get new individuals to understand and learn about the industry. What does it mean to work in the bakery sector? What does that look like? What are the types of careers and opportunities there? So going through every subsector, all the 11 subsectors that we have, and being able to offer them that experience to understand what it is to work in the industry. If we can go to the next slide. Great. So right now we're in development phase. We're going to be looking to start implementation probably April coming up. So we want to upskill and train about 400 workers across Canada in various types of facilities across the sector and subsectors. So 400 workers there. And then we're also going to be partnering with academic institutions and community employment agencies, about 200 job seekers, those who, looking for work, interested in the industry, students, maybe who don't know about our sector and so forth, and really get them engaged and get that experience about what it could be like to work in our industry. So the theme we're kind of playing around with right now is almost like, it's like a tournament of champions type of idea, where you're going to be able to go into various rooms. If you go to the next slide, it'd be great. So kind of focusing on 3 different types of areas. You're going to kind of have that Olympic feel theme where you can light up a torch, go to different rooms. You're going to collect inventory along the way, get medals, see how you do, see where you place on the podium. You'll be able to go to social emotional village, learn about some of the soft skills, and then have the whole career exploration area. So yeah, we're currently working on a few of the concepts and ideas for that, but we are super excited about this project. And we want, if you're interested in being a part of it, you want your companies to be a part of this organization, you're an educator, you want your students to be able to learn more, please connect with us at the end of the session. But will be starting to recruit and send invitations out to folks directly to be able to participate in this program. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Before we delve into the content of the report, I'm going to ask Harrison to talk a little bit about some of the terminology we'll be using in today's webinar, just so we're all grounded with some of the phrases that you're going to hear throughout the presentation. Harrison?
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Jen. So yeah, as Mark said, there's a couple of key terminologies that we use throughout the report and that I'm going to be using throughout this presentation. And the one key term here is XR technologies. And essentially XR stands for extended reality. And extended reality technologies is kind of a blanket term for the main forms of XR. So the three various types are virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more in detail of each one of these technologies a little bit later on in the webinar.
Thanks very much, Harrison. We also thought this would be a good opportunity to get a sense of the level of experience that you, our audience, already have with immersive technology. So you should see our first poll question on the screen now. It asks 3 questions: whether you've had some form of experience with virtual reality, augmented reality, or mixed reality. So we'll take a moment while you submit your answers. And also feel free to pop into the chat what types of technology you've tried or any unique experiences that you might have had. It looks like our results are starting to flow in. Mike, how are we doing?
We do have some answers coming in now. It looks like there's still a few people voting.
We're getting to around 84%. And what do the results look like, Mike?
So we still have a few coming in, but it looks like a lot more people are leaning towards VR.
Okay, so almost even with VR. It seems fewer, about 30% have had experience with AR. And it also looks like very few people have had experience with mixed reality. Harrison, I know you talked to a lot of people about XR. Did any of these results come as a surprise to you?
Yeah, Mark. So I would say no. And VR is by far the most common form of XR technology. It's been around for quite some time, and because of that, it makes sense that a lot of people have tried it. It looks like it's about a 50-50 split on the haves to the have-nots. But that also makes sense because although a lot of people have tried some form of VR, there's still a lot of people out there that haven't tried it. Typically when we're doing demos and we're meeting with people and we're at conferences, you're about split on that too, of half the people in the room usually have tried something, and then the other half it's usually their first time. And then when we talk about augmented reality, absolutely, that's becoming a little bit more popular now as smartphones become more powerful, and does not surprise me whatsoever that mixed reality is on the bottom of the list, purely because that by far is the newest form of XR, and mixed reality has really only been commercially available for the last 3 or 4 years now.
That's great. Thanks, Harrison. Now that we've set that baseline, maybe I can ask you, Harrison, to dive in and talk about the content of the report.
Absolutely. So the kind of context for today and what we want to make sure that everybody walks away with is a bit of a high-level summary of the report that was put together. And we worked in collaboration with the University of Toronto and their Oise Institute to do a global literature review of what is out there currently when it comes to XR across all different sectors. The first big piece that we want to talk about is the future of learning and how XR technology will impact education and training, both inside and out of the food and beverage workforce. The next piece is just developing a foundational understanding of XR technologies. So the 3 different types of tech that we talked about, we're going to dive into each one of those so that everybody knows what is what and kind of how to tell the difference between them. Then we're going to look at some case studies and some examples of how all these technologies are being used. Again, this is both inside the food and beverage sector and outside. And then we're going to talk about how your organization can get started with all 3 types of technologies and a couple of simple next steps that you can take to really get involved with XR. So with that being said, we're going to dive right into it. And we're going to talk about the future of education and what that looks like when we talk about XR technologies and how quickly they're becoming adopted. The first piece here is XR will enable anywhere, anytime education, allowing educators and trainers to bring things into the classroom that were not possible before, or immerse people in scenarios that just couldn't be done before because, these types of scenarios can be expensive to recreate. It'll allow this form of hybrid learning that will be a true blend of the technology with the traditional methods of teaching, enhancing the way education is delivered and really helping to connect with the next generation of learners. It will also create equal opportunity, removing barriers due to cost, location, or language. Because once these experiences are converted into XR, localization is incredibly easy. And something like bringing multi-million-dollar equipment to the northern remote parts of Canada and Ontario are very feasible with something like a VR headset. And then we're going to get into data-driven learning. So the way that this technology is developed and the way these things are created allows us to capture a huge amount of data, and that data can be used to individualize learning plans based on somebody's unique needs so that we can train not only faster, but smarter and really help learners that we weren't able to train before, really help tap into the education that they need to get them to where they need to be to work. And that kind of ties into the next point here, and that's XR's impact in the food and beverage workforce. And the three main things that we saw across other industries was that XR has the ability to help reduce labor shortages, attract new talent into the industry, and help train marginalized populations through things like localization or through things like, transcending different barriers, whether it be geographical barriers or cultural barriers. The technology could help enhance the overall onboarding and training process. So using something like virtual reality, employers could actually train employees and measure their competencies before they ever step foot into the workplace, which is really cool if you think about it. And then it also is about upskilling and reskilling. Once experiences are created, they are incredibly scalable and incredibly flexible in terms of how you can deliver them, where you can deliver them, and when you can deliver them. And this is really important for upskilling and reskilling the current workforce, because using something like VR or AR to deliver this training, again, outside of prime productivity time, is important so that employees can keep learning even when they're not on the job. When we talk about the benefits of XR, there's a few key themes that came up over and over again, and we'll tie these back to the various case studies that we'll look at in a little bit. And these themes include things like time and cost reduction. When we look at virtual reality compared to something like classroom learning, the difference is pretty big. You can take a traditional classroom course that would take about 2 hours to deliver and condense that into less than a 30-minute experience. And this was one of the stats we found in the PwC report on soft skills training, specifically around VR. One of the other big benefits is retention, both in the short term and the long term. And in this graph here, it kind of shows you where VR sits in terms of retention rates. And VR is as close to learning by doing the real thing as you can possibly get without actually going out and doing it. So it's about 75% effective when we talk about retention rates compared to things like, traditional lectures or reading or just audiovisual instructions. So it's significantly more powerful, hence why we can deliver content and deliver learning in a much quicker, much more condensed amount of time. Next, we talk about confidence and increased confidence in the learner. And in that same PwC report that I just mentioned there, we were able to see VR was significantly more impactful when it came to somebody's ability to act on issues of diversity and inclusion after doing this type of training compared to classroom or compared to e-learning. And finally, emotional connection. People who learn with XR are dramatically more connected emotionally to the content. And that's why they can retain more. And that's why they can learn more in less time, because they're truly immersed into these experiences, whether you deliver them via virtual reality or augmented reality or mixed reality. And that emotional connection just can't really be replicated any other way besides doing something in real life. Switching it up for a minute here, we're going to talk about the 3 different types of XR technology. And virtual reality is by far the most immersive form of XR that's available today. I consider virtual reality to be fully immersive, meaning somebody who puts on a VR headset is completely immersed in that virtual world and that virtual environment that you want them to be, completely closed out from the world around them. Virtual reality is also highly interactive, especially the more high-end forms of the technology. Because when you either use something like hand trackers or controllers, you can actually interact entirely with that digital world around you. And what you see in the picture to the right there is exactly that. So somebody's wearing a VR headset. Although he's sitting in his living room, he's actually driving a car in VR. And he's using his real hands to hold onto a virtual steering wheel and drive this vehicle around. And then the other cool part about VR is it's by far the most widely adopted technology when it comes to education and training with XR. And it's because it's been around for the longest. Companies like NASA and the military actually used VR before anybody even knew what VR was, for things like training people how to fly space shuttles or fly fighter jets. You can also break VR down into 2 kind of subcategories of experiences. On one hand, you have 6 degree of freedom VR experiences. And on the other, you have what's called 3 degree of freedom VR experiences. And what I mean when I say 6 degree of freedom is that these experiences are those fully interactive ones. So these types of experiences are created from the ground up. So the environment, the models, the asset, everything that you're interacting with is digitally recreated, similar to how you would create a video game. So users can not only look around those virtual environments, but they can move around forwards, backwards, up, down, left, right. And they have that full freedom to actually interact with that virtual world around them. And these are by far the most immersive and most impactful experiences you can get. 3 degree of freedom experiences, on the other hand, are a little bit less interactive, and they're actually filmed with a specialized camera. So you can actually compare that to something like Google Street View, where you're able to see those panoramic images. You can look up and down and left and right, but there's no real depth perception on this. This type of technology is great for just filming a scene or capturing an environment, but it's low-level interactive. So you can't, walk forward or backward in those experiences. When we talk about augmented reality, you can think about something like Pokemon Go, a game that was super popular about 2 or 3 years ago and became a kind of internet sensation overnight. And augmented reality can be thought of as an augmentation of the world around you. And a digital overlay is the best way to refer to this. So using either your smartphone or a tablet, you look through that screen and you're able to see some type of virtual object almost running around your space. This form of technology is by far the most accessible, since almost every smartphone nowadays has the ability to power augmented reality experiences. And AR is also by far the easiest type of experience to develop, because using existing AutoCAD models or 3D files, you can use no-code drag and drop editors to create basic AR experiences. And there's actually a lot of AR experiences also available on the App Store, some of which we'll highlight towards the end of the webinar. The final form of technology in the XR extended reality bubble is something called mixed reality. And mixed reality is by far one of my personal favorites. It's a relatively new technology that has really only gained traction in the last few years, but it can be thought of as a true blend of the real and digital world. And is also sometimes referred to as hands-free computing. So using this really specialized pair of glasses that has transparent lenses, it actually projects 3D images into your retina so that you're seeing it almost like you would be seeing a real object. And this device has an array of sensors on the outside so that it can understand your real world and understand, a table from a wall, from the floor. And using hand gestures, you can interact with those digital objects. So it truly feels like a blend of digital and real. And this type of technology is by far the best for on-the-job employees and field workers, because you can essentially do everything you can do on a computer plus more without ever having to bring a computer with you and get through all of that stuff with just your hands and hand gestures. Similar to what you see in the photo on the slide here, the user wearing the headset can see displays of graphs of machines that are in the background, and he's actually able to see and interact with that 3D motor asset to be able to understand how to properly troubleshoot something he's working on.
Thanks, Harrison. That's great. Now that we've talked about the future of learning and some of the benefits of XR and the differences between the technologies in XR, our next poll question is about your perception of the prevalence of XR technology that's being used in industry today. The global media company Forbes conducted a survey from their list of the world's most valuable brands, asking if they had developed or are using any type of XR. So what do you think the correct percentage is of the world's most valuable brands who are using XR technology today? And I see the answers are flowing in. We're at about 45%. We'll just give you a moment to submit your answers. And I'll point out now that after we've seen the results from this poll, we're going to pause and address a few questions. So if you have any questions that you haven't submitted yet, please feel free to put them in the chat now or send them directly to Mike, and we can address them after we see the results of this poll. Looks like we're hovering around 69%, Mike.
Yep, we have still a couple more coming in, but we do have a upper average.
I think on our last poll, we didn't get much past 87%. And I think we have a good indication of where the speculation was. Can you? I believe it seems a majority of you think that about 25% of the Forbes list of the world's most valuable brands are using XR today. Harrison, what do you think of that result, already knowing the answer to the question?
Yeah, so again, it doesn't surprise me with how much people just are unaware of the technologies in general. Can I give the real answer?
Of course, please.
Okay, so it's actually 75%. So 75% of brands, and these are big brands, companies like Coca-Cola, things like that, have actually developed and deployed and are using some form of XR, whether that's augmented reality, virtual reality, or mixed reality. And these companies really set the stage for the smaller guys. They have the room to invest into the R&D, so they're usually the first ones on it. And once enough of those big companies figure it out, that trickle-down effect will happen, and then a lot of small companies will be able to access it. So, it doesn't surprise me that people guessed 25%, because that's probably what I would have guessed. But the reality is we're a lot closer to, mass adoption of this technology than people think. And this poll, I believe, was actually also done pre-COVID. So post-COVID, I wouldn't be surprised if it was closer to 95%, given that COVID has kind of accelerated the technology roadmap for a lot of these big brands ahead by 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, thanks, Harrison. I was a little surprised at the majority guessing 25%. But of course, I have the advantage of knowing the answer. It's more prevalent in the larger brands, but of course the opportunity is for smaller organizations to explore the technology now. So we also have an opportunity now to pause and answer some questions. Mike, any questions in the chat?
Yeah, we did get a couple. The first one we have up is could you use AR for something like identifying inventory in a warehouse?
That's a good question. And I would say yes. So behind the scenes, powering a lot of this technology, and this was actually a conversation we were having about an hour ago, there's a lot of really robust APIs that you can tap into and leverage via something like augmented reality that piggyback off of like Google's photo recognition abilities. So you could program an AR experience, or you could program a mixed reality experience to be able to identify inventory or pick up on, SKU numbers of things on the shelf, or, different orders that need to be shipped. And that would just leverage either the camera on a augmented reality device or a camera on the mixed reality device. Those mixed reality headsets also have cameras in the front. And, you just would have to program that to identify what you're trying to identify, but it absolutely would be a really strong use case. Something like the Google Glass is a kind of a really, really early form of mixed reality, really basic functionality. That was actually one of the big use cases for that was being able to identify different things in a warehouse.
Wow, thanks, Harrison. Mike, any other questions?
Yeah, we do have one. And if they asked if they have an Oculus headset at home, can they do mixed reality?
That is a good question as well. And if people are keeping up with the news and what Oculus has been releasing over the last couple of months here, they actually hinted at this idea that a virtual reality headset could enable a mixed reality experience using the cameras again on the outside of the device. But we're still probably about 3 to 5 years away from a true convergence where you get one device that would be able to do all of these different experiences. We're getting there, but it's very much experimental right now, but absolutely in the future.
Very interesting.
Great, thanks, Harrison. I think now might be a good time to continue with the presentation. I'll ask Harrison to take us through some of the use cases from the report. Harrison?
Absolutely. So diving into use cases. When we were doing this lit review, we were looking all over the place to see, what a lot of the recurring themes were, again, in industry and outside of industry. And we were able to narrow it down to a few key areas. The first area being technical training, the second, health and safety. Then we saw a lot of soft skills training, and then things that had to do with productivity and performance. And then finally, there was a few other applications that didn't really fit into any of those categories, but were really, really cool use cases that we wanted to make sure we shared with you so that you get inspired to, again, get creative with the technology. Diving into technical training. One of the big examples we saw was technical training in nuclear facility operators. So as an operator of a nuclear facility, there's a lot you need to know. And it's a very complex, very technical process. So what General Electric did was they essentially said, we need a better way to train new operators, because throwing these people right on the floor to have them job shadow just wasn't an effective use of time. So they basically worked with a VR development studio to build out a fully interactive replica of one of these operating rooms. And using a VR headset in combination with a full set of controls that a fuel handler in one of these facilities would be using, they were able to not only provide that virtual experience where you're able to go step by step through the process, but they were able to provide the feel of the real thing. So this device that's in the photo above, again, mimicked the force feedback of the controls and the process that a real operator would be doing, to again help them recognize those subtle things in the real plant. And what they saw here was that the VR solution was able to improve the skill set of participants and also contributed to the cost and risk reduction over time. The next cool example of technical training that we saw was with training of heavy duty crane operators. In a very similar way, the American Fuel and Petroleum Manufacturers Group out of Houston, Texas, combine virtual reality with realistic crane controls to, again, give operators that ability to practice and see the real thing, but also feel the real thing. And using this, they were able to take what was a 30-day activity-based training program that had a 120-page manual with it, and they distilled it down into a 30-minute VR-based activity. And through that activity, they were able to measure and validate all the competencies that they needed to measure to get somebody into a real crane. There's also a lot of really great examples beyond just crane operator training for things like forklift training, or again, really specialized machine training that would be more applicable to people in the food and beverage workforce. Talking about safety training, this is actually where we saw one of the first big examples of food and beverage companies. And this was actually done by Tyson Foods in the US. Tyson partnered with a company called Striver VR to be able to find a way to reduce the injuries happening in the workplace. And what they did was they turned to a VR solution, specifically a 6 degree of freedom VR solution. So they used a virtual reality camera to film a bunch of different training scenarios, and then they delivered those training scenarios to their employees in virtual reality. Not only did they meet that goal of 15% reduction in injuries, they were able to exceed it. And in the following year, they saw a 17% reduction in workplace injuries after implementing that VR training. And the really cool thing that they realized as well is that this type of training was able to transcend language and cultural barriers and allowed Tyson to leverage this across all employee populations. The next health and safety example that we saw that we thought was really interesting was in aviation training. And this idea of replicating real life, high risk scenarios that you just couldn't replicate in the real world without a lot of money and a lot of time. The International Air Transport Association partnered with a VR development company to basically create a wide array of these scenarios that somebody working on the ground in one of these airports would face, from your basic scenarios to your disaster scenarios. And what they found is that using VR, they were able to provide a faster route to competency development. And crews that went through this type of training also experienced a much greater breadth of scenarios. And what that led to was just overall better trained people and a cost reduction because of that better training. When we talk about soft skills development in VR, things like leadership training was definitely a recurring theme. And this is something that we see, again, with a lot of those Forbes most valuable brands. You can see a list of all the companies here, but it was companies like Coca-Cola, T-Mobile, Google, Johnson & Johnson that have already been engaging with leadership training in VR. And this particular company called Immersion is incredibly unique because they don't just develop an experience and deliver it. They deliver these real-time VR experiences where somebody who is putting on a headset actually interacts with real people. So the picture there that you see with those 3 different computer-generated characters are actually powered by an actor, so that you're able to have real-time conversations with them and get that fluidity of a back and forth conversation that you would have in real life, but wrapped in particular scenarios, whether it be in an office or in the workplace. They're able to mix the scenarios up, mix the characters up that you're interacting with to, again, get it that much closer to a real life scenario. What they saw was that the engagement of participants in this type of leadership training tripled in the span of 9 months. And the companies that went through this, they witnessed their employees become much better communicators with longer lasting results. And these companies still use this type of training today. And it's actually quite affordable, more affordable than you would think. The way it's delivered is via some type of hourly rate. And you can basically work with Immersion to create any type of scenario, whether it's leadership training or diversity and inclusion training. It's also heavily used in the medical space for having really difficult conversations with patients and, potentially telling them a bad diagnosis. So Immersion is by far the biggest player in the training space when it comes to soft skills development. One of the other really big examples, and probably one of the biggest rollouts of the technology, was in this idea of empathy and customer service training with virtual reality. And this was done by Walmart. So they wanted to find a way to better train their customer service representatives and include that empathy training in that customer service, consumer excellence training piece. So what they did was they partnered up with, again, that Striver VR company, and they used that specialized 360 camera, and they created a whole range of pre-recorded scenarios that would play, pause, and give the employee a minute to answer. And depending on how you answered, the scenario would play out slightly different. What Walmart saw was that employees who went through this training had a major boost in confidence and retention, and test scores improved by 10 to 15%, not just for those who went through the experience, but those who watched others go through the experience also saw the same boost. Getting into productivity and performance, we see things like personalized on-the-job training with mixed reality. Using mixed reality, we were able to see that using something like the Microsoft HoloLens, you were able to really change the way that that training was delivered. And in this particular example, it was a company that was in the fast food sector, and they needed a way to better train new employees. So they said, hey, why don't we gamify this type of training? So what they did was they basically created SOPs, standard operating procedures with mixed reality that had a little hint of gamification in it. So they did things like, have a scoring system, do time to completion to encourage the employees to kind of compete against each other. And what they saw was that the overall employees that went through this type of training were much more satisfied with the onboarding process, and the overall onboarding process was a lot shorter. So in turn, the profitability of the business went up, being associated with being able to quickly train and adopt to these new procedures. The other really cool example of training with this technology and productivity and performance was actually done with one of the association members. So Gagnon Brothers uses the HoloLens to reduce equipment downtime with mixed reality. And specifically here in this example, they had a lot of difficulties with COVID-19 and bringing in new technicians to stay incredibly innovative and competitive. They're always bringing in new pieces of machinery and new equipment to constantly innovate in their process. And these types of equipment come from literally all over the world. So before COVID-19, they actually had scheduled a piece of equipment that was going to get delivered, and it was going to be delivered, and then technicians from overseas were going to come in, install the machinery, train everybody on how to use it. But that whole plan got scrapped because of COVID-19. So they turned to the Microsoft HoloLens and an application called Cognitive Spark. And essentially what Cognitive Spark allows people to do is put that mixed reality device on, broadcast exactly what they're seeing to technicians anywhere in the world, and those technicians can spatially annotate into that scene, as well as drop 3D models and documents and AutoCAD files into the view of the employee as well. And for those of you who don't know what a spatial annotation is, it's basically if I'm wearing a pair of glasses and somebody says, hey, you need to look at this piece of machinery, or look at this particular nut or bolt, and I turn away, that highlight actually stays in place and is fixed to a particular space. So it's an incredibly powerful workflow when you're dealing with incredibly complex machinery, because you can have that expert quickly bring your attention to a particular piece and help you troubleshoot things faster. So Gagnon Brothers was able to not only get those pieces of equipment installed easier, but they're always utilizing this device to reduce equipment downtime. So if a machine never breaks down, they now use the HoloLens to remotely bring these experts into the space to troubleshoot things as fast as they can. And again, ensure that things are always performing the way that they need to be. Finally, we talk about a couple of other really cool applications of the technology that didn't really fit into any of those other categories. And the first example here is in marketing and advertising. So specifically selling products. This particular example done by Coca-Cola was done using augmented reality. You can see the technicians above there actually using that AR application. And the problem that they were having is selling displays of products into businesses can be challenging because business owners don't know what they're going to look like. They're hard to visualize. They're hard to, really understand what, that random piece of equipment might look like in their space. And they were having a lot of people send equipment back and, finding it difficult to quickly close sales. So they said, hey, we're going to use augmented reality and a tablet so that I can show a business owner exactly what one model versus the next model looks like. And after embedding this into the sales process, they were actually able to reduce that overall time to close a sale. So they would show a business owner, he would see it, he would get it, and he'd be much more likely to buy it on the spot. And then they were actually also able to reduce the returns because that whole idea of what will it look like wasn't a factor anymore. Whereas just buying something out of a catalog, it might not look like the real thing, and you get it and, expectations aren't quite there. So using AR was a really great way to visualize product and to shorten that overall sales process. The final example here in the other applications section is, again, one of my personal favorites, hence why I had to save it for the last. And if you can't guess just by looking at the scene, this is a heavy gamification and also experiential marketing done by none other than Kentucky Fried Chicken. So KFC wanted to find a way to make their training a little bit more fun, a little bit more engaging. So they created essentially what was an escape room. And to get out of this room, you had to go through that 16-step proprietary process for pressure cooking the Colonel's chicken. And you play this game, you go through the process, and if you make it to the end, you escape. What they didn't realize was that this was not only going to be a huge hit with employees, but kind of a cultural hit with everybody in the general public. They ended up releasing this as a kind of a fun game to the public, and myself included. We played this, I played this, and it left me thinking a lot differently about KFC. Of like, wow, look at this company in using this technology in a really fun, really creative way. And still to this day, when I think about this, I think about KFC in a really positive way. So this ended up being a big experiential marketing tool for KFC, and you've seen some companies do similar things. And this was really just a snapshot of a couple of the examples. In the report itself, there's a lot more than what's here, but these were some of our favorite that we thought we'd share.
Thanks, Harrison. That's terrific. There's some really interesting and compelling solutions in those case studies. And now that we've looked at some examples, it's possible you might be thinking about how you could use XR to solve a problem in your organization. So our next poll question is, where would you use XR first in your organization, choosing from among these areas that we've covered in our presentation, which are technical training, health and safety, soft skills, productivity and performance, or other applications? We give you a moment to submit your answers, and also feel free, if you have an interesting idea, feel free to put it in the chat. And it looks like it's kind of a balanced response. At 67% of participants. 70%. So Harrison, do you find that there's any particular area that you find yourself discussing with your clients more often than any of the others listed here?
Yeah, Mark. I think it always comes back down to the business and the audience that we're talking with. I think one thing that a lot of businesses look at first is, where will the return on investment be? So for them, it's where is the pain point? Is it in the process and the need to improve the process? Is it in the need to train people faster? Is it in the need to develop a particular skill set, or do something like reduce injury? And it always does change depending on who you're talking to, but it doesn't surprise me that technical training here is number one, because we're talking about this type of technology in the context of manufacturing. manufacturing food, but it's still manufacturing. And, some of these processes, some of the equipment used can be complicated. I've been through a few facilities myself, and I'm always in awe of the type of equipment that you see. So it doesn't surprise me here that technical training looks like it's number one, with about 36% of people saying that that's an area that they want to focus into. And then health and safety and productivity and performance kind of falling in second. Health and safety is big because it's one of those things that is almost like your insurance. You don't really think about it until something happens, and then you're like, oh crap, I wish I would have had more insurance there. So using VR or using some of these 6 Degree of Freedom experiences, similar to what Tyson Foods has done, to really drive home safety practices and safety techniques is critical, especially when you talk about VR in the context of memory retention. So it's not just remembering it for the test, but it's being able to remember it and recall it when that scenario does come up, and make sure you're remembering those critical things. And that's the difference between potentially cutting off a finger and going home, safe without injury. So VR has proven, and different types of XR have proven, already effective and a pretty immediate ROI in just those 2 areas. And same with productivity and performance. How can you make employees more productive? How can you make your process more productive and make sure that performance is where you want to be? Again, that comes back to consistent delivery of training, which VR and different forms of XR technology is great for. Soft skills a little bit lower on the list, but I think that's because people don't necessarily understand how powerful that technology can be in the context of role-based training, where you're going through different role play scenarios. I'd be very curious as to what other applications people have in mind. So I encourage people to throw in the chat there what ideas they have on the other application side.
That's great. Thanks, Harrison. It feels like we're getting a little tight on time. We've only got about 6 minutes left, and we want to tell everybody how they can get started with VR. So I'll ask you to jump into that right away.
Awesome. So getting started with XR. You know a little bit about it. You know what is what. So now how can you get started with it? I'm going to jump right into this and kind of highlight 4 different things. So the first big piece here is choosing the right headset. There's 3 main types of devices you can choose from. PC-based VR being the most powerful, but also the most costly. A good PC-based system with the headset and the computer will cost about $2,500 to $5,000. And then standalone VR, which is still good, very portable, but limited in terms of how realistic you can make experiences. And then 3 Degree of Freedom VR headsets like Google Cardboard that require a smartphone. I'm going to right away say that 3DOF VR is not something you want to dive into because it's very low quality and it's very quickly becoming obsolete now that the standalone VR headsets like the Oculus Quest can power those 6DOF and 3DOF experiences. My recommendation to you guys would be either look at a standalone VR headset or a PC-based VR headset, depending on the content that you want to get into. Something like the Oculus Quest 2 is great. They do have a version of that is untethered to Facebook and is kind of enterprise grade, so you don't have to worry about the same privacy concerns if you were to just go out and buy that one at Best Buy. And that device on the enterprise subscription will cost around $1,500, I believe. But it's a great first device to just get started with some stuff and be experimenting. And it also works as a PC headset. You can actually tether it to a computer to run the more powerful stuff. Next, we look at the apps that you want to get started with. There's a lot of really great off-the-shelf experiences you can get involved with, and they might not be tailored to the food processing sector yet, but things that are even games that can be leveraged for communication exercises, team building exercises, for a very, very low cost, just as a way to dip your toes in a little bit with technology. And then we talk about 360-degree video. So if you do want to customize content, if you do want to do something specifically to your own organization, you can get a 360 camera for a few $100s, and you can bring that into the workplace and take photos and take videos and then edit that in just any traditional video editing software and load that onto a headset to deliver content that is very specific, very customized to your organization. If you do want to get into custom development, it can be costly. Most custom VR projects start at around $50,000 just for a pilot. So it is not necessarily for the faint of heart, especially for things that are very specific. You really need to understand the ROI and what you're trying to do to justify custom development. When we talk about augmented reality, this technology is incredibly easy to get started with. You could actually pull your smartphones out right now, and as I'm talking, jump onto the App Store and look up some of these experiences. Vuforia Chalk is one really great one, and that's essentially a remote support experience that allows you to stream what you're seeing to somebody else and do those spatial annotations that I mentioned. Augmenture allows you to view existing AutoCAD files and 3D models in AR, similar to that picture there. And then Place Notes is basically augmented reality sticky notes. So you can actually place little sticky notes, little reminders all over the place, create different sets of sticky notes, and then using an AR smartphone or a tablet, you can move that around. You can actually see the sticky notes that other people placed around the room. And that can be used for something like, reminding people where things are, or, what to inspect as they're walking through a building. Next, we talk about getting started with mixed reality. The big thing here is you need to get a mixed reality device. And there's a lot of devices out there, but there's only really one that I would recommend, and that's the Microsoft HoloLens. More specifically, the Microsoft HoloLens 2. The HoloLens has been out for a few years now, and it's already on its second generation. But once you get that device, it will cost you about $5,000 Canadian. But you can then preload that with experiences that are already developed. So something like Dynamics 365 Remote Assist is very similar to that Cognitive Spark application that allows real-time viewing with experts remotely and allows somebody to basically cast what they're seeing while staying hands-free. The other application that can be used with the mixed reality device is something called Dynamics 365 Guides. And this essentially lets you create standard operating procedures in mixed reality. And it's a very drag and drop experience. So you don't actually need any programming knowledge to create these SOPs. You have to have some technical abilities, but you don't need to be a programmer. And you can create any SOP using mixed reality, so that when somebody puts that device on and they basically press, start how to do this, it'll take them step by step, and you can display models or photos or videos and kind of overlay that in the environment around them so that they can get that SOP while they're actually doing the real thing. And then in terms of final thoughts here and how we can move forward with XR, a couple of reminders and things to kind of take away. So the first thing here is collaboration, especially when it comes to custom development. We need to work together. We need to collaborate as companies. We need to collaborate with associations. We need to collaborate with government so that we can build the high impact content that the industry needs to really get the most value out of this type of stuff. Start slow and start small. Please don't go buy 20 VR headsets or AR devices after this call. Get one and play with it a little bit, and bring it home, show your friends, show your family, test it out with management and some of your employees to really get a sense of what that device can do and what you could do with that device. And make sure you know your user. People who love technology, people who embrace technology will be quick to jump on this. But you don't want to give this to somebody who won't even touch a computer because it's new technology and there is a bit of a learning curve. So make sure you understand your audience and who your intended end user will be before bringing this into your strategy. And then finally, don't be afraid to work with experts. There's a lot of phenomenal companies out there. Canada has a lot of really, really great companies in the XR space that you can just sit down with for half an hour with no expectations at all, besides just learning a little bit and trying to get an idea of where you should go with the technology. This really helps to avoid jumping into a rabbit hole and potentially wasting money in particular areas. So again, with that being said, XR has the potential to play a critical role in supporting companies of all sizes within the food and beverage sector. Now it's up to you guys to move it forward.
Thanks, Harrison. And first of all, my apologies to anybody who has a hard stop right now. I'll just remind you that we're going to be sending a link to a video of the presentation out, so you'll have an opportunity to catch the question and answer if you have to jump off the call now. We did cover a lot of information in the hour. We looked at future of the future of learning, understanding XR technologies and the different hardware that's involved. We learned about the benefits of XR. We looked at some really innovative VR solutions in some case studies. And we also talked about how to get started as a food and beverage processor with XR today. But I'll just point out that the presentation is just a sample of the content of the report. There's a lot of great information in there that we couldn't cover today. So I'll just remind everyone that we're going to be sending you a link to the digital copy of the report and also a link to a video of today's presentation. And also we're going to be sending a link to our project website. For any of you who are interested in becoming a partner with FPSC in iFood 360, we'd love to hear from you. Just go to ifood360.ca and fill out our application form. We believe this is going to be a great opportunity for you to explore the possibilities of XR with very limited risk and very limited cost. And we're really looking forward to forming partnerships with you and developing this exciting project to deliver to workers and job seekers across the country. So as I said, I've seen some great questions in the chat, and we're happy to stay along to respond to some of those. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you to Mike, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Harrison, for the presentation today. But most of all, thank you to your audience for being with us here today and for your interest in the report and for your interest in the project. It's great to see this level of interest in this exciting technology and where we can take it as an industry. So like I said, please feel free to stay for the question and answer. We'll hang around and answer as many questions as we can. But to those of you who have to leave, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Now, Mike, I know I was reading some great questions in the chat. Any for Harrison?
Absolutely. So this might be a tricky one to answer, Harrison, because it is involving another company. But with Oculus being driven by Facebook accounts, do you see this factoring into any privacy issues personally?
Yes. So good question. And that's typically now the first question that comes up when we even say the name Oculus. So Oculus was bought by Facebook. I think it was for like $4 or $5 billion several years ago. And Facebook's strategy is to basically socialize VR. And a part of that is like tying it in with Facebook. But they do recognize the need for those privacy and security compliances when you're talking about bringing those devices into an enterprise setting. So they have an option for businesses to be able to buy it unhooked to Facebook with all of the standard security and data privacy pieces alongside there. As a business, you will end up paying more for it because they essentially subsidize the device for consumers because they have the data in the back end. But absolutely, it's definitely a question that gets asked a lot. And there are some competitors that are much more enterprise friendly, enterprise focused than Facebook coming up with good devices. But we'll probably see more of that over the next year. Is that right now, Oculus is just, it's a company we love to hate because they make phenomenal hardware, but they are associated with Facebook. So they're not super accommodating, but they have made some accommodations. But as more competitors come out, as more devices come out, we won't have to necessarily bend as much the will of Oculus and Facebook.
Very interesting. Okay. Another one we had come up very relevant to the sector is it possible to provide any kind of resistance within the training? Learning to cut meat is somewhat about the feel, so learners would need to be able to feel that they have hit a bone or made a bad cut.
That's a really, really great question. And yes, you can do that. But depending on the level of what you're looking for, and there's different types of hardware that you would actually embed into that experience. So on the basic level, there's vibrations and there's audio haptic that you can give somebody. So when you're holding the controller, if you touch something you're not supposed to do, the controller will vibrate. similar to the old school game Operation. So you can give them those reminders and those sensations so that, if you were to do something like a butchery experience and you're cutting through meat, if you cut too far, the controller would vibrate, letting that user know that they've hit bones. And then you can also simulate resistance. So if they tried to push the knife down, the knife would actually, like in the experience itself, kick back. If you get more into medical training where that resistance, that feel is like critical, you can actually get these really crazy, really funky gloves that basically have like little hydraulic pieces attached to your finger. So when you're trying to grab virtual objects, it actually resists and it feels like you're actually grabbing real things. Those types of hardware can be like crazy expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when you're doing life and death scenarios, like operating on somebody's heart or brain, it's money well spent because you just can't afford to make the mistakes in real life. So different levels of haptics that you can introduce to simulate the feel, but all sorts of tricks and techniques you can do it on a more cost-effective basis than getting those crazy haptic gloves.
Right. But that is something we have been looking into for a while now. And Harrison's in on that too. And another group, we kind of, there is a proposal. It was in the works for a larger meat project for this because it is the largest subsector in Canada and we work a lot with the meat folks. So anyway, stay tuned for that. We'll see, but it is next level and it would be in the millions of dollars to create something like that for sure.
Great question. Yeah, thanks, guys. So another one that came up is for soft skill training. Is there a single player mode or a multiplayer mode? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so you can do both. And it really comes down to the type of experience that you want to deliver. So in a single player mode, you can do two things. So you can have pre-scripted scenarios and basically you're talking to a computer or you're watching a scene unfold and then that scene pauses and gives you a chance to basically answer, kind of like the choose your own adventure games. That's really great for single player, if there's no internet connectivity or if you just want one person to go through that experience at one time. The multiplayer stuff is really what immersion has been doing. So it's multiplayer, but it's you and an actual real person that is an actor on the other side. And the multiplayer experiences allow for real-time communication. And in the context of something like an escape room, that can transcend just developing soft skills and having conversational into team building and collaboration and all those other really important things that you just can't achieve playing an experience by yourself. So I personally love the multiplayer, although the single player does serve a great purpose as well when you can't afford to take everybody out of the workplace or put two people in a headset at the same time.
Harrison, when we talked earlier about off-the-shelf solutions, soft skills seems like one of the areas where there'd be an opportunity to pursue that. Do you know of any affordable soft skills off-the-shelf solutions that people could explore?
Yeah, so immersion is probably the most affordable. I don't necessarily have their up-to-date pricing, but I believe to get involved with them on kind of a yearly basis, you subscribe to or prepay for a certain number of training hours. And they have a wide array of like pre-scripted scenarios. So the actors kind of have scripts or scenes that they follow along. And the way that they've developed that technology is just, it becomes affordable because although you're paying for somebody's time on an hourly basis, it's the most affordable way to get involved with this type of stuff. And it's by far the most tested and kind of used amongst all these big companies. So Immersion would be one company to look into. Other than that, we haven't personally seen a lot of soft skills training tools that are publicly available. We've heard of different projects, but nothing that has been deployed to a wider audience.
Great, thanks, Harrison. I just saw a question pop up in the chat. What is the company's website? So I'll just call it out now. It's fpsc-ctac.com. Or if you go to ifood360.ca, you'll find a link on that website where you can switch over to. Oh, but it's entirely possible now that I consider it, Harrison, that they may be asking for Immersion's website.
Yes. So I believe if you look up Immersion immersion VR in Google, that'll be the first one that pops up. There should only be one immersion. I don't have their handle offhand, but Google immersion virtual reality training, and they will be the first one.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
I've sent to Mark in the chat.
How are we doing, Mike? Any more questions in the chat?
We do not have any more questions immediately, aside from immersion.
Okay, well, that feels like a good opportunity to thank everyone again for joining us. We really appreciate you spending your time with us this afternoon or again this morning, wherever you are. We'll look forward to hearing from you through our website, and you'll find all our contact information there if you don't necessarily want to apply, but you just want to get more information and get in touch. So again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful day.